Welcome back to this final segment in Sovereign Fundamental Analysis. I've decided to put a splice in here because I like to keep these under an hour, so we've got about 25 minutes and you'll have completed the first pillar. So let's finish up with this talking about money. I have a podcast that I recommend with G. Edward Griffin called What is Money? You can look it up. It's years ago. You can read The Creature from Jekyll Island, which teaches a little bit about his opinions on money. I'm less of a conspiracy theorist, but I cannot deny the truth of his historical perspective and what money really is. And so think of it this way. If you have let's talk about certification. Paper, these are all paper assets right here, okay? Some people think that paper assets and real estate are different. They are, but really one is owning a business or a derivative, and one is owning a house, but a deed and a stock certificate is just telling what you own, right? It's just owning a different asset. If I say, prove to me this house is yours, certify it, you'll show me a deed on a piece of paper. If I say, prove to me you own these stocks, you'll show me a certificate. Prove to me that the government has promised you $1, you'll show me $1. Prove to me that you have a car in the valet lot. Well, here's your claim stub. Prove to me that you have a coat, that this cloak in the cloak room is yours. Well, I have a claim check. Prove to me that this dry cleaning is yours. I have a receipt. That we work on this basis all the time. This is called receipt money, is what Edward Griffin calls it. It's receipt money. This is called fiat money right here. Well, this isn't, because this is a silver certificate. So if you were to have a valet stub, it just shows what you own. So over here's the paper representation of the stuff that you own. And this is all about social and primal. There's a great guy named, I just love this man. His name is Dr. Gopalan, Radha Gopalan. And he's actually Robert Kiyosaki's heart surgeon. Years ago when Robert had heart surgery. He's from the Mayo Clinic, obviously incredible credentials, but he's also very much a Eastern medicine, very wise, very meditative, doesn't react. He's one of these guys that meditates, that just doesn't judge things when they happen. And he made an interesting comment. He says, we have a social part to us and a primal part. So when you think of walking down the street and you accidentally bump into somebody, oh, pardon me, I didn't see you. Please excuse me. I'm so sorry. As civil, as social as you can possibly be, social and civil. But then you look at New Orleans with Hurricane Katrina, and people were acting like animals. Because in the end of the day, we are animals. There is a primal part to us where if there's one sandwich and two families, there's fights going on. And it's really, really interesting that you look at the only thing that really allows you to have what you have is if we remain civil, and that there's a government body that will honor this paper, regardless of what the paper is. If all of a sudden a government dissolved and there was no court to say, no, this really is my house, then it's primal. It's like, no, if I'm bigger and stronger, it becomes my house, right? And it's very hard to remain wealthy in upheaval because you can only defend in a primal situation what you can defend. So these are interesting things to think about, how important it is to have civility to prove that you own what you own. I was on an investing cruise, and these guys were speaking, and they were talking about how paper assets weren't worth anything. They're just paper. It doesn't matter that it certifies that you own one of the best companies in the world. It's garbage. It's paper. And I thought, okay, what are these guys selling? And they go, well, we're selling farmland in Venezuela or somewhere, coffee farms in Colombia. And I'm like, coffee farms in Colombia? Yeah, that's where I want my money. I want a coffee farm in Colombia to sell Colombian coffee. I'm sure that government is just squeaky clean. No problems there. And if there are any problems, all I have to say is, well, I'm an American. So the idea is, look, paper is there, and it's the practical way to say that you own something. A paper asset is just, you can't haul your gold around with you. If you have $10 million of gold, How are you going to hang on to that? How are you going to haul that around? And you know, if you went to a Best Buy and you said, I don't have any cash, but I have a gold coin, and you handed it to the cashier for, you know, $1,000 television with a gold ounce, you'd think they'd take it. They would if they were smart, but there's no place in the till for that gold. And it would be interesting to see if they would take it. You know, I think a manager might, an owner definitely would, but would a clerk? Would a clerk take gold as payment for a big screen TV anymore? I don't know if they would or not. They should. If they don't, they're crazy. Gold should be a legal tender, but you know, I don't know if in practice the world is paper. In fact, paper is even becoming silly because now money, really, the certification is on your computer screen. You know, you have that loan from the bank, and all of a sudden you use that money to pay for a house, and you never wrote a check. You just went to a title company and signed a bunch of stuff. You never got a check. You know, it was just all done electronically. So even paper certifications are getting replaced with a lot electronic certifications. It's how the world is. Well, the point is this. I can't print valet stubs to create cars. And that's the big question with fiat currency. And when you look at, you know, I'd encourage you to read books on Keynesian economics and Austrian economics, Mises. I'd encourage you to learn what modern monetary theory is. There's actually a theory called monetary theory that says, look, it's okay to print money. It's okay to do it. And they have a point. We'll talk about what that point is, but we'll talk about that point. You know, I'm more of an Austrian guy because I'm more traditional, but it's important to look at both sides of the coin because that's where intelligence is. And if we become dogmatic and we say, well, it's only my way, we'd lose the chance to learn, right? If we say, well, someone, you know, 20 years ago said such and such, well, now we're not listening to Steve Jobs, who said, don't get trapped by dogma, which is the results of living with other people's thinking. So I very much don't like listening to what some dude, you know, 30 years ago said. What is the new thing? You know, we don't do bloodletting anymore, right? We're hopefully becoming less racist and more tolerant now, right? And so understanding Keynesian versus Austrian in the terms of one is good and one is bad is unhealthy for an education. We want to come to the table and learn. And that's one of the things I've learned over the last 10 years is, you know, I don't know. Every teacher wants to act like they know everything. You know, oh, here's the 4 pillars of investing. I know everything. No, I don't. That's really tough for a professor, I think, to say. I know I don't know, and so I'm learning more along with you. And I hope you enjoy that attitude. So you can't print valet stubs and certainly conjure more cars. That's fraud, because these valet stubs are counterfeits because they don't certify a car. In other words, there's only one of these valet stubs valet tickets that is valid. It's the first one. All the others are counterfeits because there are no cars to back it up. And so we say, gee, you know, paper represents something else. Paper represents something tangible. Well, in the old days, if you look at this silver certificate from 1935, it looks a lot like a dollar bill in Hawaii. But you'll notice that this is a certificate. It's not a dollar bill. It's a certificate that says silver certificate. This certifies, can you read this with me? This certifies that there is on deposit in the Treasury of the United States of America $1 in silver payable to the bearer on demand. So in other words, this is called receipt money. This is like a valet stub. This is like a coat check for the cloakroom. This tells anyone that there's an ounce of silver here, or at least $1 worth of silver, sitting in the Treasury, and anyone that has this piece of paper can go there and say, give me my silver. So this becomes legal tender to settle all debts, public and private. It's legal. You say, look, I owe you $1 in silver. Tell you what, I can either go and get the silver or I can just give you this certificate. Which do you want? They say this certificate fits in my wallet a lot better than a bunch of silver, especially if it's a $50 purchase or $2,000 purchase. It's better to have paper than it is 20 pounds of silver all the time. But the problem with this is you couldn't print these without silver backing it up. See, you can't just turn on the printing press, because in order to print a silver certificate, you have to first mine, mint, and have someone deposit silver. So when someone deposits silver, then you can print one of these out and give it to them. But if you just started printing all these, this is a lie now, because there is not, this no longer does certify that in the Treasury of the United States there's $1 of silver payable to pay on the mine. It's not there. So this is fraud. These are false, counterfeit. These are lies. These don't certify. They claim to certify their silver, but there's not, because if you just print them, they're not there. So what Nixon did that was huge, you had Bretton Woods and all these other things you can study. Another guy that I just love, he was a Rich Dad advisor for many years, and I still think his book is fabulous, is Mike Maloney. He's a fabulous resource at goldsilver.com. Of course, he hates paper money because he sells gold, and he'll tell you, don't buy anything but gold, because that's his business. But nonetheless, the guy's brilliant, and he's probably, of all the people I know, he has studied monetary policy and money and currency, and the difference between currency and money, more than any of my personal friends. He's fabulous. And so, Mike Maloney's book is a good one to read if you want to learn more about Bretton Woods agreements and, the history of currency as opposed to the history of money. But in 1971, it's a funny YouTube to watch. I'm tempted to even take the time to watch it, but we're short on time. Is Nixon took us off the gold standard, and he said, we're going to and notice that this is now a Federal Reserve note instead of a silver certificate. So while they look fairly similar, they are very, very different in what they say. Notice that this says this is just a Federal Reserve note, and it just says $1. In other words, this is now a promise to pay debt, but it really becomes the silver in and of itself. And there's a rationale for this that's very hard to figure out, because we're used to having paper represent something. And to say the paper itself has a value, how do you invent gold? How do you invent? In other words, we always thought it had to be backed by something. And this is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States. Well, now you're just making another promise. So it's not fraud, because you're promising to pay something. And it's an interesting thing, because if you have earnings from a company, $10,000, and you have stock certificates say we own this, the owners are entitled to $1,000 per share. If you dilute this by printing more stock certificates, it dilutes the value of this stock, because now it's only $10 a share. Let me make sure you understand that. If you only have this split up, and you have a finite amount of these, 10 of them, and the earnings are $10,000, then each of these guys are entitled to $1,000, right? 10,000 divided by 10 shareholders or share units here is $1,000 per share. If you print stock certificates, it dilutes the value there. So that's one of the problems with printing money. Is here you have this full faith and credit, whatever that is. What if you just print a bunch? Well, it's going to dilute the value of what these are worth. So this is really interesting stuff. That a dollar bill becomes a replacement for gold rather than being backed by gold. And it's basically, the argument is if these are kept scarce, and we all agree, we just agree that, look, these are valuable. Okay, we all just agree that these are valuable to have. As long as we don't print too many of them, it would be a lot like gold, right? Notice Ben Bernanke's language here, okay? What has this got to do with monetary policy? Just like gold. That's his stance. Clear back in 2002. He says U.S. dollars are just like gold. In other words, if you have gold over here and a U.S. dollar over here, they're the same. They're equivalent to each other. They like each other. They're just like each other. So he says dollars are now similar to gold. It's the same as mining gold, because they have value only to the extent that they're limited supply. So the fact that we don't have a lot of them, and we all agree that they're valuable. This is more Keynesian ideas and modern monetary theory ideas that, hey, it doesn't matter because we control the printing press. And since we control the printing press, we can still make them as scarce or in abundant as we choose. And this is better than gold because we don't have to mine it. We can have more control over it. So they're limited supply. But the U.S. government has a technology called a printing press, or its electronic equivalent, that allows us to produce as many dollars as we want at essentially no cost. So by increasing the number of U.S. dollars in circulation, or even threatening to do so, the U.S. government can reduce the value of a dollar in terms of goods or services, which is equivalent to raising prices of those goods and services. So the Fed has a mandate of full employment, moderate interest rates, and price stabilization. And they feel that because we're no longer messing with gold, we're creating our own gold, so to speak, these dollar bills, these pieces of paper. Because we're the only ones that can make them, they're a lot like gold now because they're hard to find and hard to get. And now, by how many we print, and it affects their value. So if we flood the market with them, it's going to take more of them to buy a commodity, effectively raising the prices of the goods and services. So notice that the value doesn't change. And go back to what we did in the last session. Value is a gallon of gas. And notice here, or a gallon of oil, notice here the value doesn't change. The caloric value, the amount of calories that can be burnt when you light this on fire in an engine, the amount of power it can deliver to a drivetrain in a car doesn't change. The mileage of your car might be 20 miles a gallon. That doesn't change. It's still 20 gallons, and it doesn't give you any more value to your life than it did before. It's just the cost is higher. The value is the same. What is the value of a gallon of gas? It can drive your car, so many miles, 23 miles to the gallon. So the value of this is 23 miles. That doesn't change. But, in all of these, 23 miles a gallon, 23 miles a gallon, the mileage it delivers doesn't change, doesn't get better. It costs more because we're printing more money, and the dollars are easy to get. The gas is hard to get. See, this we still got to drill out of the ground. This we can just print. So when these become easy to get, this is still hard to get. So it takes a lot more of these to exchange and trade for one of these. And it really impacts how you think about money when you do that. The United States can pay any debt it has because we can always print money to do that. It's so hard to accept a modern monetary theory because that's such a crazy idea. Now, you can see by Ben Bernanke that what has he said that's a lie here? What has he said that's a lie? Dollars certainly do have value to the extent they're strictly limited in supply, and they can raise prices of goods and services. So the no one's going to argue with Ben Bernanke that this is true, that you can pull this off. And no one's going to argue with Alan Greenspan because they can certainly do that, and they've been doing it, and Japan's been doing it for a long time. The problem comes, and you're going to have to make up your own choices about how you feel about this. The problem comes is when you look at history and the lack of discipline. In my interview with Ed Griffin on the podcast, he says the problem is if you give people power like that, they say absolute power corrupts absolutely. It may be a good thing, but Ed Griffin says, look, you give people like power like that, they tend to abuse it. And if you look at our promises and you look at our fiscal, when you talk about promises, how easy they are to make, and now basically a dollar is a promise, right? It's a promise to pay. What? $1. It's very, very abstract, very hard to wrap your head around for some. At least it was hard for me to wrap my head around it. But if you look at history, this stuff has not worked very well. We've printed so many pieces of paper in history. This is called a 1/3 dollar. It's called a Continental, and it was set up in George Washington's day by what we call the Continental Congress in Philadelphia. And he needed a way to pay his soldiers. So this is February 17th, 1776. This is the money that you had, before the Revolutionary War. And this was money right here. And notice it was all, it was printed and then given a script number, written, and then signed, and there you go. Well, when the Revolutionary War broke out, the British got their hands on these, and they began printing them and counterfeiting them. And they would bring them over to the colonies, and they would flood the colonies with these where they were everywhere. And so what happened was there were so many of them, they started to lose their value, and they engaged in financial warfare by trying to reduce the value of a continental, which back then was what we used for exchange, for currency. And it's fascinating, the history of it. Well, when George Washington's soldiers finished the Revolutionary War, this money wasn't worth much, and so there were two phrases coined. One was, "This is as good as gold," because gold was worth something, and the paper money was not. And then there's another phrase that said, "This is not worth a continental." So if something was worth something, they say, "Boy, that's good as gold." Like this guy's promise, boy, his promise is as good as gold. But another guy's promise not be, his word isn't worth a continental. Interesting stuff. But this has happened probably thousands of times when we've started to just print money that didn't have anything back in it. The Confederate United States war between the states in the Civil War, they printed Confederate money to finance their war, and pretty soon soap's $50, a suit's $2,700. Back in the 1800s, I mean that's today's inflation. Hundreds of years ago, a couple hundred years ago, whatever it was, 30s, 40s, Revolutionary War. And so they hyperinflated. This is an awesome one. When you print this money out of nothing, they have to reboot it. And so look at this, 400 octillion. Have you ever seen a number that big? I mean, check this out. We got thousands, millions, billions, trillions, quadrillions. I don't even know what these are before you get to octillions. I don't even know what the numbers are between. But all of a sudden, you have 400 octillion pengo become one fortnit. Just absolutely crazy. Probably the most popular one that people know about is Zimbabwe. Is in 1980, in Zimbabwe currency exchange was $1.47 US. They were 47% stronger than a dollar. In fact, a Zimbabwe dollar was worth more than a US dollar by 147. Well, what if you would have borrowed these? We might talk about this when we talk about shorting. What if you'd have borrowed a bunch of these? That would have been the smartest thing you could have done, because by 2009, by the time that 30-year mortgage is up, right? It was they were basically worth nothing. They were having $100 trillion bills being printed. And when you look at Zimbabwe, this kid in the article, reportedly, this kid is on his way to buy, these are $200,000 bills. He's on his way to buy a banana. This guy, you can see he's already paid the check with his credit card. This right here is the tip. It's kind of a joke that he's leaving a tip for the waitress right here with all this cash. And ultimately, these wound up in the trash can. They were just not there. So this has happened over and over. So the battle between Keynesian economics, between Austrian economics, Austrian being, hey, we should have sound money, Keynesian being, hey, you can print the Article 10. There are people in the United States Congress today, political people, I'll name names. A guy like Bernie Sanders doesn't really care about paying for stuff because he believes that you could just print your way out of it and just pay for everything. And that's, just don't worry about it. And, it's interesting. Is he right or wrong? Japan's sure been able to do it for a while. They haven't gotten off scot-free. But you look at all these different hyperinflations where these are where the currency just got out of control, And here you have Zimbabwe in 2008. And Argentina right now. I was in Argentina a few years ago. They're struggling with inflation. So debtors win and savers lose with this. If a person, it really changes how you want to think about money perhaps, because before, does it make sense to go to a job anymore? Because what's happening in a job, is you're working for these. And since they can be printed, why would you want to work for those anymore? And if they start printing a lot of them, all these that you've saved go down in value, right? Because as they print them, this dollar that you had in the bank could buy a gallon of gas. Now this dollar can no longer buy a gallon of gas because its value is going down. So the number of so you've got to understand this. It really helps if a person understands that it's not the number of dollars I have in the bank, it's the value of those dollars I have in the bank. Let me say it again. It's not the number of dollars I have in the bank. If I have $1 here and they print money, I'm still going to have $1. The number of dollars won't change. But the value of this dollar goes down tremendously because the dollars are so easy to get. Well, this is really awesome right here because now you have a mortgage of $100,000 and your house is worth 10 grand. Well, your mortgage number won't change. The number of dollars you borrowed won't change, but look at the value of your house now. Now you've got 10 to 1. You can refinance that, pull money out, tax-free. Imagine, what you could do with this. It's incredible what you could do with it. So all of a sudden, your savings becomes less valuable and your mortgage becomes less valuable. Well, in essence, if you look at this in terms of assets and liabilities and net worth, watch this. We'll talk about when we get into shorting right here. Assets, liabilities. Well, let's say this one is represented by black. Well, now your net worth is going to go down if this goes down. But let's let this one be represented by green. If your mortgage gets less valuable, and this goes down, your net worth actually goes up. Isn't that interesting? Because the only way for your net worth to go up is for the assets to go up and the liabilities to go down. So don't look at it in terms of number, just look at it in terms of value. Even though the number of dollars here in the savings might be the same and the number you owe might stay the same, your net worth still goes up and down because what's this really worth? See the word net worth? What's this really worth? It's not worth very much, right? This mortgage is not worth very much. Well, if the liability is not worth very much, then your worth goes up because what you owed is going down. So it's a very abstract idea. We'll get more into this as we go into shorting the dollar, but hopefully this makes you think, boy, do I really want a job? Do I really want to go out and work for money and then not know what to do with it? And do I want to save it? I mean, think about this. What is the one direction we know? The one direction we know is we know we can print money. We know we have been printing money. We know we're in a fiscal position where we're probably going to have to print more money. Why would anyone put $1 in a savings account right now knowing that we're going to print more of these? Why would you put $1 in savings? And that's where I have to kind of part company with, Susie Orman and Dave Ramsey do a great job because they teach discipline. They're disciplinarians. What they do is they say, look, get your financial house in order by making decisions to get smaller is basically their idea. They say, look, here's your paycheck, save more of it, spend less of it. There you go. I don't like that idea. I like creativity. It doesn't take any creativity to have discipline, but to be creative as an investor, that's what you might want to do is how do I create more? And how do I create assets rather than cash? We create assets that spit off cash, but as soon as we get that cash, we just want another asset again. Please understand that our goal in the 4 pillars of investing course is not to get you more cash, is to get you more cash flow so you can buy more assets. The cash is simply a way to acquire the asset. The end game is not cash. The end game is asset, right? This is what you want. The asset is what you want. This is not what you want because this is going down in value, this is going up. So as soon as you get one of these, that is the way to buy an asset. So if you really believe that the dollar is going to lose value, you wouldn't want to save dollars in your asset column. You wouldn't want to save dollars, they're going down. You'd want to save houses and stocks and gold and oil and stuff like this that's going to get more valuable. If you believe the dollar is going to get less, you should be, well, I won't say anyone should be anything. It's your choice. But a person who becomes asset-centered will be richer than someone who becomes currency centered. Our goal, our end game is not to create currency, because every time we create the currency, immediately we're to convert it into another asset, which is called compounding, which we'll talk about in the cash flow section. So imagine being able to pay off your mortgage with the same amount of money to buy a banana. This can hurt people if they don't know about it. I kind of got to hurry because we're past time in this segment, but I think it's one we keep in one segment. Deflation hurts people. This is an interesting story in 2015 where what people did is they borrowed francs. Okay, so here you borrow a franc, a Swiss franc, but you earned zloty. If I say that correctly, yeah, zloty. So your income is about zloty, but then you got to pay your mortgage off in francs. So income, expense, asset, liability. So the problem is as long as this is a good exchange rate, you're fine. But what if the value of the franc goes up and the value of the zloty goes down? Well, now you've got to earn a whole bunch more zlotys to pay off that franc. Warsaw. Peter, an apartment manager here, had just finished work checking faucets and making sure rents were paid. After making himself a coffee, he logged into a Polish social network and noticed that someone had posted the current exchange rate with the Swiss franc. I was frozen, he said, seeing the franc's value had soared that day. Like hundreds of thousands of other Eastern Europeans, Mr. Zzenspek says, let me see if I can do this right, Szczepanik, I'm not good at this, Szczepanik, 46, was paying off a mortgage he took out in francs instead of his local zloty. In an instant, his monthly payment rose more than 20% when the Switzerland's bank unexpectedly moved its cap on currency. So this is fundamental. I mean, fundamental analysis on the sovereign level matters, right? Imagine this guy has to work 20% more to do this. That's a lot of money if you add 20% more work to your work week. That means you go from 40 hours a week to 48 hours a week to earn that extra money just to pay your mortgage off. That's an extra day of work. Now you instead of work 5 days a week, you work 6 days a week with an increase of 20%. You got to get a part-time job on Saturday to pay your mortgage off because of the currency exchange. So this is why Forex is interesting to people, is you make money simply on understanding. This is where Soros has done so well. So many times Soros is so good here. He's almost single-handedly bankrupted companies or countries because he understands sovereign fundamental analysis and where currencies are likely to go. So, policy, demographics to the future. So we want to watch this stuff, and there's an economic calendar. So the Federal Open Market Committee we watch, gross domestic product we watch, jobs we watch, housing starts we watch. So if you're in the coaching program, we're going to have you research some of these things and know when they're on the calendar. It affects how trade works. And, a rising tide lifts all ships. If the fiscal policy and monetary policy and economic calendar are checked, you can see where that stuff can go. Sovereign fundamentals impact something called systemic risk. And when we get to the fourth pillar, we'll talk about that stuff. Trade deficits, printing currency. This is when diversification doesn't help you if the whole market collapses, right? And so systemic risk is the number one reason I like to study sovereign fundamentals and know, credit default swap, debt to GDP ratios, Federal Reserve policy, European Central Bank of Europe, Central Bank of Japan policy. There you go. Here's some homework. Find the debt to GDP of 3 countries. Check the monetary policy of the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and the Bank of Japan. Find out how much money they're printing and what their interest rates are. Fundamental analysis, do one of the United States. Find the next date of the Federal Open Market Committee and what they'll announce. And check the next GDP and non-farm payroll. And as always, get with your coach as well. Let's just look at only for this, the education continuum for only fundamental analysis. do you feel you've made progress here? And where would you put yourself on this scale now? Hopefully no one says they're ignorant. They're aware of what fundamental analysis is. They're aware of why someone would care about it. And perhaps you're even dipping your toe now into becoming competent where you could pass a test. With the right practice, how do you get proficient in something? Practicing with coaches helping you. Go faster. If you practice this under the guidance of a coach that can give you feedback and accelerate your practice, you can enter proficiency faster. So this is about teaching. This is about coaching. I hope you've enjoyed the first pillar. Congratulations. You've just completed a basic course on fundamental analysis and the first pillar of investing. Great, great job.